Everything began to change one February afternoon when I realized the knock at the door didn't belong to the mailman or a familiar neighbor. It was a sharp, urgent knock, measured and confident, and it came with a thick envelope and the unfamiliar face of a man in a gray suit. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, his tone so flat and practiced it sounded like he'd said that same line 1,000 times before. "I'm a representative from Wells Central Bank. I'm here to verify some details regarding a new mortgage under your name and that of your son, Mr. Andrew Whitmore." I froze. "Mortgage," I repeated, feeling a tightness grip my chest. "Yes, ma'am. It's in the amount of $1,200,000. Our records indicate you are a co-signer and the legal property owner, so we're required to confirm your signature and address before we can proceed with disbursement." I stood motionless, my hand gripping the doorframe, the coolness of the wood pressing into my palm. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to any mortgage. I didn't even know this was happening. "There must be a mistake," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I haven't signed any documents. I absolutely did not consent to mortgage this home." Sometimes it takes just one knock on the door to turn a mother's entire world upside down. Tell us, what was the moment that woke you up from quiet endurance? And if you want to follow stories that still your heart before setting it alight again, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a moment. The man looked at me again, and for the first time, there was hesitation in his eyes. "Would you mind if I photographed your driver's license and compared it to the original signature on file?" I nodded slowly, my hands trembling as I pulled my ID from my wallet. My eyes stayed locked on the envelope he had handed me. Inside was a copy of the mortgage agreement, and on the dotted line, beneath the fake co-signer's name, was a signature that mimicked mine so well it sent a chill down my spine. Familiar, yet entirely forged. I couldn't say a word. I simply closed the door, turned slowly, and walked back into what I had once believed was the safest place in the world, my home. Andrew was the only child I still had regular contact with. My daughter Rachel had moved out of state after getting married, and she barely called anymore. Andrew had gone through a divorce 5 years ago and had asked to move in with me temporarily while he got his career back on track. It was supposed to be a few weeks, then a few months. Now, it had been 3 years. I never asked him to pay rent. I cooked him dinner. I cleaned his room. I did his laundry. Sometimes I even handed him cash because he said he was building a startup that was about to get funded. And really, what mother could say no to helping her child? But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that while I was setting dinner on the table, Andrew had been submitting forged documents in my name to the bank. I had no idea when exactly my house had been turned into collateral for a massive loan. After that meeting with the man from the bank, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. I told myself not to confront Andrew just yet. I needed clarity first. I needed to be absolutely sure. So I waited for him to leave the house, then carefully opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, I found a folder of financial documents, copies of forms bearing my name, my social security number, and signatures that weren't mine, yet looked eerily convincing. So convincing, I almost doubted myself for a second. Tucked between those documents was a thick stack from a real estate brokerage. The front page read, "Passive Asset Conversion Project, Transitioning Property Ownership into High-End Rental Capital." Paperclipped on top was a full proposal for an investment strategy that listed my mansion as the secured asset. I felt dizzy. In that moment, something inside me snapped. That was the day I realized Andrew no longer saw me as his mother. In his eyes, I had become the final obstacle standing between him and a large payout. I picked up the phone and called my personal attorney, Diana Griffin, a dear friend from our university days. I never thought I'd need her in this kind of situation, but I needed her now. She came the very next day. After listening to everything, she sat silently for a long time, then finally said, "He can't mortgage the house without your genuine consent. But if the bank moves forward, it means fraud is already in play. And Margaret, if you remain silent, they'll treat your silence as agreement." I asked quietly, "Then what should I do?" Diana didn't hesitate. "Flip the board. Move fast. Before the bank disperses any funds, you need to transfer the property, liquidate it, and disappear, cleanly, without warning. Don't tell him, don't argue, and above all, don't let your emotions get in the way." I sat there, wordless for a long while. Then I nodded. 3 days later, I contacted a private brokerage firm I had once worked with years ago when selling off a property in Santa Barbara. I instructed them to handle this quietly, within a closed network of private investors. No public listings, no online presence, no market buzz. Within 5 days, an international buyer agreed to purchase the property for $2,150,000. The The payment was wired directly through an international banking channel to a private account still held jointly in my name and George's, a retirement investment fund we had set up together nearly 2 decades ago. I withdrew exactly $600,000 in cash and redistributed it across 3 secondary accounts, all under my name alone, accounts that Andrew never had access to and didn't even know existed. By the time Andrew came home that evening, I was still in the kitchen, preparing dinner just like always. I smiled at him. I asked what he'd like to eat. I moved through the motions like the same gentle mother he had always known, warm, familiar, predictable, but deep inside, I was no longer the woman who believed his promises, no longer the mother who clung to words like, "Don't worry, Mom, I'd never let anything happen to our home." That woman was gone. What stood in her place was a mother quietly preparing to leave the house she had built, while taking it with her in a way her son could never predict. I had thought I would be calm when the truth finally settled in. I had told myself that once I fully understood what Andrew had done, once I accepted that he had forged my signature and tried to mortgage the home my husband and I poured our lives into, the pain would pass quickly. I would feel the sting, maybe cry a little, and then I would forgive him, like mothers always do. But I was wrong, because after several days of continuing the charade, cooking dinner, waiting for him to come home, watching him eat comfortably in the living room I had furnished with Persian rugs I personally chose, I realized something far deeper. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been used, manipulated, dismissed at the core of who I was. That Saturday night, he walked in with a bottle of expensive wine and a shopping bag from a high-end athletic brand. I asked, casually, "Is there something special today?" He grinned, a little too wide. "Got the investment, Mom. They're in. Someone funded it. We might launch the app by the end of the year." I smiled back, but something inside me turned cold. "Congratulations," I said softly. "Who invested?" He snapped his fingers like he was celebrating. "Some new tech fund out of LA, but they needed a guarantor, so I had to show them I had access to real assets. Lucky our house is in your name. It looks super credible on paper." I stopped moving. The spoon I was holding slipped from my hand and clanged loudly into the sink, the metallic sound echoing through the quiet kitchen like a scream. "What did you just say?" Andrew turned, his smile faltering just slightly, but he tried to laugh it off. "I just mentioned the house to impress them. Nothing serious. Don't worry about it." "Don't worry?" My entire spine stiffened. I stood still, my mouth frozen, my hands cold. I said nothing more. I didn't need to, because in that moment I knew exactly who my son had become and what I had to do next. The next day, while Andrew was out all day to meet with potential partners, I walked through the house like I was saying goodbye. For real this time. I stepped into the small study George once used, a space that had now become Andrew's cluttered workstation, filled with cables, notes, and unread finance books stacked in uneven piles. I wasn't expecting to find anything, but somehow I found everything. Tucked beneath the desk, wedged tightly between 2 thick, dusty accounting manuals, was a brown leather folder. I pulled it out, the edges stiff and dry, and what I saw inside made my breath catch in my throat. A formal business partnership agreement. It read, "Partner Andrew Whitmore agrees to secure funding for the startup investment of $1,200,000 by leveraging the residential property under his mother's legal ownership as collateral." My name, Margaret Whitmore, was mentioned clearly in the next section, but with a sickening twist. I had no authority to interfere with the business decisions of Party A, despite the house being legally in my name. I gripped the folder so tightly my fingers turned white. The paper trembled in my hands, almost burning with the fire of betrayal now running through my veins. When Andrew walked through the front door at exactly 10 p.m. that evening, I was already waiting, seated in the armchair by the living room window. The soft yellow lighting couldn't mask the expression on my face. It made him stop mid-step. I didn't say a word. I simply raised the folder. He glanced at it and let out a long sigh. "Come on, Mom. I knew you'd find it eventually." I couldn't form the words. "I only did it because I need a real shot. You've had your life. You've done your living. I'm just getting started. And what do you even do with this house, besides dusting furniture and planting flowers? Why can't you let me use it for something meaningful?" I stood up, still holding the folder. My voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "So in your mind, I should just sit here growing older while you use the house your father and I built with our bare hands as collateral for a venture you don't even fully understand?" Andrew smirked, like it was all a joke I was too old to get. "You're stuck in the past, Mom. This is the startup era. Assets are supposed to generate capital, not sit around collecting dust. You don't get it, and that's fine. But just don't stand in my way." I looked at the son I once held in my arms, the child I cradled through high fevers, the one I stayed up all night for just to chase away his nightmares, now standing in front of me, calling me an obstacle. My heart shattered, but I didn't fall apart. I stood tall. I looked him directly in the eyes and said calmly, "You're mistaken. I'm not the obstacle. I'm the foundation." I didn't scream. I didn't throw papers across the room or smash a glass like they do in movies. I simply turned and walked upstairs, closed my bedroom door, locked it quietly. Then I sat down on the edge of my bed, opened my laptop, and sent the final confirmation email for the property transfer. After that, I removed Andrew's name from every single inheritance document across my financial portfolio. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had watched my own son trade his mother's love for a chance at some nameless startup investment. But here's what I realized. Betrayal doesn't break you. It moves you to act. And Andrew had no idea. Tonight would be the last night he ever called this place our home. The house was sold. The $2,150,000 was now divided safely across 3 accounts, fully under my control. I had already withdrawn $600,000 and allocated it in 3 parts. One portion transferred to my personal investment account in Switzerland, active since 1994, another placed in a legal contingency fund managed by my attorney, Diana Griffin, and the last portion quietly stored in a locked safe at my private notary's office, just 7 blocks from here. I did all of this while Andrew remained blissfully unaware. I still cooked. I still waited for him to come home at 7:30 p.m. sharp. I still poured soup into the fine porcelain bowl and asked like nothing had changed. "How was your day, sweetheart?" He answered mid-bite, barely looking up. "Good. You should be excited. We're gonna start splitting the profits soon." I smiled and replied simply, "Ah, just that." A soft "ah," as light as a breeze, but inside me, every word he spoke was like a chisel striking stone, each one carving deeper into the truth I already knew. I no longer looked at Andrew through the eyes of a mother. I looked at him the way one studies a failing stock, something once full of promise, now spiraling into crisis from unchecked greed and delusion. I met Diana at an old cafe, the kind with cracked tile floors and dusty bookshelves, the same one where I used to bring my students to read poetry decades ago. We sat in the farthest corner, away from prying eyes. "Are you sure about this?" Diana asked, her voice low, cautious. "I'm sure," I replied, gripping her hand firmly. "I don't need that house anymore, but I won't let it be used to hurt me again." "Where will you go?" she asked gently. "Palos Verdes," I said. "I've already placed a deposit on a small penthouse. Tight security. No one knows my name. And from the balcony, I can see the ocean straight ahead." Diana smiled. "Sounds like the beginning of a brand new life." I nodded. "It is. A life where I don't have to ask permission just to exist." I had exactly 7 days before the buyer would return to do the final walkthrough of the house. I had everything planned down to the hour. The valuable items, the oil paintings, George's engagement ring, his Patek Philippe watch, and my mother's antique porcelain tea set were all carefully packed and shipped in sealed crates through a professional fine art transport company I once used for the Camarillo Museum exhibit. No one noticed. No one asked. Andrew didn't see that the living room was gradually emptying, that the hallway no longer held our family photographs, that the Persian rug beneath the dining table had already been rolled and moved out. Maybe it's because he no longer cared, or maybe it's because he believed that an old mother had no power other than to cook meals and stay quiet. I stayed up that night, not out of fear, but because I wanted to remember everything. The armchair where George used to sit with the Sunday paper. The oak cabinet where I stored Rachel's handwritten letters before she stopped writing to me. The kitchen counter where I baked raisin bread every Christmas for the whole family, now just me and the lonely hum of the exhaust fan in a room no one entered anymore. Before sunrise, I wrote a letter. By hand. I folded it carefully and left it in the top drawer of the hallway table. "Andrew, you once said this house belonged to you. But you were wrong. It belongs to those who cherish it. I don't need revenge. I only want freedom, and you'll never truly understand what you've lost. Mom, I didn't sign my name, not out of anger, but because the woman who once signed everything with love and trust no longer existed." At 5:15 a.m., I wheeled my brown leather suitcase to the door and closed it softly behind me. No one in the house knew I was leaving. I left no trace behind, except a handwritten letter and a small photo of George the Furs had always kept at my bedside. The taxi I had booked through an encrypted app was waiting. Its destination was the office of my attorney, Diana. There, The final documents to transfer ownership of the house were ready to be executed. At exactly 9 a.m., Diana called me. "It's done," she said. "The property has officially been removed from your name. All funds are secure. Congratulations, Margaret. You're free." The penthouse in Palos Verdes wasn't as grand as my former estate, but it had floor-to-ceiling glass walls that opened up to the ocean. It was peaceful, private, and mine. I had breakfast alone that morning. A cup of mint tea, a slice of toast. I reread the old letters George had written to me when he was still alive. No one knew where I was. There were no nosy neighbors asking questions. No children knocking at my door asking for money or a place to crash. Just me, and a kind of peace I hadn't felt in decades. 3 days later, Andrew came home carrying a brand new credit card and a fat stack of investment papers. But there was no home, no mother, no legal rights. The new owners had already moved in, and the name Margaret Whitmore had been erased from every single record connected to that property. Andrew screamed. He made dozens of phone calls, but each one received the same automated response: "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable." A week passed after I left the house, and I hadn't answered a single call from Andrew, not because I missed him, but because I was curious to see how long it would take him to realize that the house he thought would make him rich no longer belonged to him. The answer came sooner than I expected. "Andrew, Mom, where are you? There are strangers in the house. They said they bought it. What is going on?" Andrew, 2 minutes later, "You can't do this to me. That house was everything to me." Andrew, 5 minutes later, "If you don't reply, I'll sue you." I didn't respond. I simply stared at the screen. 1 minute. Then I put the phone down. I was sitting on the penthouse balcony, sipping oolong tea, listening to the waves crash gently against the rocks below. Calm, serene, and finally, no longer bound by the chains of his lies. 3 days later, Diana Griffin called me. Her voice carried a tone of dry amusement she didn't bother to hide. "Your golden boy showed up at my office this morning," she said. "He barged in yelling that you were mentally kidnapped and that I manipulated you into selling the house. He threatened to sue both of us." I let out a soft laugh. "And what did you say to him?" I asked. Diana didn't miss a beat. "I showed him the video recording, the one where you signed the contract, the one where you looked straight into the camera and said clearly, 'I am fully aware and choosing to transfer this property of my own free will.'" I nodded slowly. "And then," she sighed, "he threw a chair across the room, and then I handed him a copy of the formal complaint you filed, accusing him of signature forgery and financial document fraud." What Andrew never knew was that I had reported his actions weeks earlier, straight to the Securities Exchange and the Financial Fraud Task Force, as soon as I discovered the fake mortgage documents with my forged signature. I didn't confront him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call and demand answers. I just submitted the evidence, signed my name, and waited. When the bank's legal team called me to verify my signature, that wasn't a routine check. It was a setup designed to see if Andrew would continue lying, and he did, right to the end. Months earlier, I had secretly canceled the property's fire insurance after a small kitchen fire broke out. Caused by Andrew, he had left candles burning unattended while disappearing for hours to play video games with his friends. I never told him, but in that moment, I knew the house was no longer a safe place for me, not emotionally, not physically. Andrew only found out about the cancellation when the new buyers asked the insurance company for repair coverage on a damaged pipe and were told the policy had been inactive for 12 months. That's when he called me, shouting so loud the voicemail crackled. "You knew I was planning an investment. Why would you cancel the insurance behind my back? Do you want me to lose everything?" I answered with one line: "If you can't even keep a candle under control, you shouldn't be in charge of an entire house." That was the part Andrew never anticipated. A year ago, I overheard him mention the name Lucas Thorne, a former classmate of his and someone I remembered well. Lucas had once been my student, a quiet, gifted young artist I had mentored back when I still taught art. Lucas owed me more than a thank you, and when I heard Andrew was planning to launch a startup with him, I quietly reached out. Lucas came to see me, and together, we formed a plan. I invested $300,000 in Lucas's startup, under one condition: he was never to mention my name to Andrew, not under any circumstance. I wanted to know the truth. Whether my son had real ability or just empty ambition, the answer came faster than I expected. Lucas showed me the entire proposal Andrew had drafted. It was nothing but fluff, a string of buzzwords glued together, sprinkled with flashy charts and graphs ripped straight from internet templates. There was no plan, no structure, No understanding of business, product, or people. Just noise. I knew Andrew would come, and I left the door unlocked. That afternoon, he appeared at the entrance of the penthouse, eyes red, hair disheveled, his hands trembling as he clutched a stack of papers. "You have to give the house back, Mom. You can't do this. That house, it belongs to the family." I looked him straight in the eyes. "The family?" I asked. He said nothing. "You mean the family's house?" I repeated slowly. "Then when you forged my signature, did you think about family then?" His voice cracked. You were spying on me?" "No," I said calmly. "I didn't need to. The truth found its way to me." Andrew threw the papers onto the table with a thud. "You've just lost everything. I'm all you have left." I rose from my chair and stepped onto the balcony, letting the wind wash over me before turning back to face him. "No," I said softly. "I haven't lost anything. I've just reclaimed myself." Andrew walked out. He didn't cry. He didn't fall to his knees, begging for forgiveness like I had once imagined on those lonely nights when I first realized he had betrayed me. He just stared at me, then turned around and left. No apology. No trace of regret. I sat silently on the sofa, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the quiet ache of a mother finally accepting that love alone cannot protect you from ingratitude. I wandered through the penthouse like a stranger in my own life. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with thinning gray hair, tired eyes, and lips trembling beneath the warm, golden light. I thought of George. If he were alive, what would he do? Would he take my hands and whisper, "Forgive him, please, for me," the way he used to say when Rachel broke my antique vase as a child? Or would he look me in the eye, squeeze my shoulders, and say, "You've endured enough. It's time"? I didn't know. And what hurt more than not knowing was not being sure if I even wanted to know anymore. The next morning, I received a small package. Inside was a handwritten letter and a copy of a contract. "Dear Ms. Margaret, I've officially dissolved all partnership ties with Andrew. The project will continue, but without him. I know you didn't ask me to do this, but I can't build anything on a foundation of lies and blind ambition. And thank you for believing in me. Lucas." I held the letter and read it 3 times. Each time, my heart grew heavier, not because Andrew had been removed from the project, but because a young man who wasn't even family had shown me more gratitude than my own son ever had. Later that afternoon, I visited Diana's office. I hadn't scheduled an appointment, but she always kept a chair ready for me and a pot of ginger tea on the warmer. "Are we rewriting the will today?" she asked gently but directly. I nodded. "Remove Andrew." Diana didn't ask why. She understood. "And who should inherit that portion?" she asked, pausing. I hesitated. Then I picked up my phone and opened a photo from my gallery. It was a picture of me and Lucas, taken years ago. He was a messy, paint-covered little boy holding up a portrait he'd drawn of his late mother. The look in his eyes back then had been nothing but hope. I handed the photo to Diana. "This one," I said. She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "He's not blood," I said quietly, "but he's grateful." I returned home just before dusk. The ocean was calm, no crashing waves, no restless tides. It was as if the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to write the next chapter of my life. I sat down at the mahogany desk George had built for me when he retired. I opened my leather-bound journal and began to write. "Andrew, you've chosen your path. I'm not angry, but I can no longer keep hoping. A mother's love doesn't disappear, but legal rights can. If one day you understand, then by that time, it won't be wealth you need. You'll need forgiveness. And when that day comes, I'll be listening." I folded the letter, not to send it. I placed it in an envelope and locked it away in the safe. Not for Andrew to read, but as a reminder to myself that I once wanted to forgive, but also understood when it was time to walk away. The next morning, my phone rang. An unknown number, from a hospital. I picked up. My heart clenched. "We're calling from the emergency department. Mr. Andrew Whitmore was admitted moments ago with severe hypoglycemia. There's no listed emergency contact aside from you in the old records." I froze. My legs wouldn't move. A part of me wanted to say, "I'm no longer his next of kin." But another part whispered, "He's still your son." I stood outside the ICU. Through the glass, I could see Andrew lying there, gaunt, pale, frail. He looked nothing like the boy who used to run into my arms at 7, crying after being bullied at school. I placed my hand on the cold glass, then turned and walked away. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew pain is a lesson we must learn ourselves. It cannot be erased by pity. Back home, I opened the safe. I took out the same envelope, and I added a single line beneath the old letter. If you ever want to see me, not for money, I will always keep a seat open at the dinner table. I never imagined I'd return to the hospital again, not as a mother, but as a witness in a criminal investigation. It all began 4 days after I walked away from Andrew's hospital room. At the time, I believed it was over. I thought life had delivered its ending, a thankless son, and a mother who had walked away with her dignity intact. I was wrong. The phone rang at 1:03 in the morning. The caller was my attorney, Diana Griffin, not from her mobile, but through an emergency line. Margaret, I need you to stay calm. Something serious has happened. I sat up straight. My heart pounded like a drum. Is Andrew dead? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, ashamed of the question. Number. But something even more serious has come up. The police just showed up at my office. I went rigid. Why? There was a $600,000 wire from your account to an offshore company with a false identity, allegedly directed by Andrew. And worse, they suspect you were involved. 3 hours later, I was at the Federal Investigation Bureau. The agent laid out the evidence, fake emails in my name, an AI-generated voice clip of a woman sounding like me, authorizing a full transfer of funds to a so-called charitable trust named the Whitmore Legacy Fund. I sat frozen. My hands were ice. My attorney looked at me. Uncertainty flickered behind her professional calm. There could have been voice spoofing, but the digital trail leads directly back to your personal laptop. And suddenly, it all clicked. The old laptop I had left behind in the villa, the one Andrew once had remote access to, the betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. The person I had trusted the most, Diana, my friend for 3 decades, had turned. Investigators played a hidden recording submitted anonymously. Diana's voice, unmistakably hers, whispered to a man whose identity remained concealed. If we play this right, Margaret's accounts will be frozen. She won't touch a dime. And me? The man asked. You'll get your cut. I've already arranged the Cayman account. I stopped breathing. My lawyer, my lifelong friend, had sold me out for the rest of my estate. The house I thought I sold privately? It was all part of a setup. The buyer? Not some faceless investor. It was Andrew's ex-wife, operating under a new name, disguised as a private equity broker. Their real plan wasn't just to take the house. They wanted everything, transaction records, financial paperwork, anything I'd left behind, including old wills and encrypted stock credentials. There, in the investigator's office, I was formally detained, suspected of laundering money and aiding unlawful international transfers. I had no one to call. Not Diana, no friends, no family. Just me, in a cold metal chair. That night, I sat in a holding cell staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the woman I'd become. No longer a devoted mother, no longer Margaret of Westlake Village, just a broken woman. Alone. The next morning, someone posted bail, a name that made my throat tighten, my heart nearly give out. Lucas Thorne. He arrived with documents, evidence, and a sworn statement. I am the official recipient of investment funds from Mrs. Margaret Whitmore. Any account or transaction without her signature is fraudulent. I have the original footage, clear proof that she never authorized Andrew or anyone else. Lucas wasn't just an artist. He had a background in law and financial crime investigation. 7 years ago, he worked with an organization dedicated to protecting elderly rights. From the moment he noticed suspicious withdrawals linked to Andrew, he began quietly monitoring the transactions. And now, he was the key witness who saved me. With the evidence Lucas provided, authorities issued an emergency arrest warrant for Andrew. He was taken into custody at a temporary residence. As the handcuffs clicked into place, he looked at me and said just one thing. You chose someone else over your own son. You'll have to live with that. I stood still, silent. But my heart didn't tremble with rage anymore. It was steady. There were no more expectations, no more pain, only this. I had survived, and I had survived without shame. A month later, I moved to a quiet town by Lake Tahoe. No luxury, no noise, just a small wooden cabin, a lavender garden, and a weathered table that overlooked the water. Lucas visited weekly. We painted, we brewed tea, we listened to the classical records George used to love. I didn't have much left, but I still had myself, and for someone who nearly lost everything, reputation, finances, identity, that alone felt like a victory. There are battles in life we don't choose, but we still have to fight. I used to believe that being a mother was enough to be loved, that if I gave everything, my child would never abandon me. I was wrong. I confused blood with loyalty. I forgot that love should never be a reason to let others trample your dignity. I lost the house I once called home. I lost the son who once promised, "Mom, you're my whole world." I lost my best friend, my sense of safety, and the values I had upheld for 70 years. I was accused, imprisoned, and doubted by those I trusted most to protect me. And yet, I was saved by someone who didn't share my name or my blood. Lucas never called me Mom. He didn't carry the Whitmore name, but he listened. He believed in me. He stood up for me when I no longer had the strength to defend myself. The boy I once taught to paint sunflowers had become the one to pull me from the shadows, not out of obligation, but from gratitude. And in that act, I finally understood something. The family that saves you may not be the one you gave birth to, but it is the one that chooses you when everyone else has walked away. Family isn't defined by blood, honor isn't sealed in a will, and the worth of a mother should never be measured by the money in her account or whose name is on the deed. To be a mother is to sacrifice, but not to surrender your dignity. To be a mother is to forgive, but not to allow yourself to be endlessly disrespected. And sometimes, to be a mother is to stand up, walk away, and say, "I choose me." A message to you who stayed until the end. If you're still watching, I believe this wasn't just a story for you. You saw a part of yourself in it. Maybe your own child once ignored you. Maybe they called you old-fashioned. Maybe you've sat in a quiet house, one that once rang with laughter, but now only the TV keeps you company. And maybe, just maybe, you've asked yourself, where did I go wrong? I used to ask the same thing, but here's what I've come to understand. I wasn't wrong for loving. I wasn't wrong for giving. My only mistake was forgetting that I too am a person with value, with limits, and with the right to be respected. And if you too are carrying the silent heartbreak of being dismissed by the very child you raised, remember, kindness does not mean silence. If you feel like you're being slowly pushed out of your own life, you don't need to shout, you don't need to rage, you just need to stand quietly and choose a life where you no longer need permission to be yourself. We are here with you at She Stories Margaret. We don't tell these stories just to make you cry. We tell them so you know. You are not alone. We are here for every mother, grandmother, and woman who was ever forgotten, but chose gentleness as strength anyway. Share your story in the comments. Have you ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it? Were you pushed into the shadows by your own child? Or did you rise, quietly, powerfully, when no one believed you could? We want to hear it. We will read it. And if you can't speak it just yet, we'll speak it for you. If you believe kindness doesn't mean silence, click like. If you've ever been underestimated for your age, your gender, or your stillness, share this story with another woman. She might need to be reminded of her worth today. And if you want to hear more true stories of real women who chose dignity over despair, subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking this journey together. Because you deserve to see the day when light returns, not from anyone else, but from within you. This is a fictional story, not intended to resemble any real individuals. All names, characters, and situations have been created solely to share a meaningful life lesson with viewers.